Hey guys, this is Mark. Welcome to FlowRunner training. In this series, we focus on sample flows included in the FlowRunner training workspace. This video focuses on error handling in FlowRunner. Error handling is an extremely important concept because no matter how well your flow is designed, you need to be ready to handle errors. Fortunately, handling of errors in FlowRunner is quite simple. You just need to make sure that you take advantage of that facility that is provided by the system. The story for this flow is quite simple. We will be sending a request into the flow with parameters. And what the flow does, it wakes up when that request is sent and saves a record in the database and then sends an email to the user. Okay, and then the data that it saves in the database, and then the email address that it sends the email to, come from the parameters that you send into the flow. And the reason the flow is designed this way is because you have control over those parameters. So it becomes very simple for you to simulate a scenario where, for instance, the names of the parameters are not what the flow expects. Or, for instance, the email address where the email will be sent to is malformed. And the flow demonstrates of what happens in those scenarios. So I will start with a demonstration that shows how to capture those errors and how they are presented in the flow. And the way we're presenting them is sort of a visual for and useful for debugging purposes. However, in your flows, you would handle errors as you see fit, as it is appropriate for the actual scenario that is being handled in the flow. So I will start with a demo, and then we will see how that flow is implemented and what actually happens to capture those errors in your flow. So let's dig in and see how it works. We are in the error handling flow, and to get this flow, make sure that you created a training workspace for FlowRunner. And before we start this flow, let's make sure that we have a couple of items taken care of in the housekeeping perspective. When you get this flow, this send user notification block, you will need to configure it by creating a OAuth connection. And the second part is all these log blocks. They use FlowRunner logger. And before you run this flow, make sure you access FlowRunner logger. And it is a web-based application. To access it, go to logger.flowrunner.ai. And you will see a screen like this. If you've used it before, you may already have an active session. And in this case, you will see the session code at the very bottom. You can copy it. You don't have to start a new one. But if this is the first time, copy this 5-digit code and then select any of the log blocks, and there are 6 of them right here in this flow, and then click the configure button and paste that 5-digit code in here and click save. You need to do it only once, and then all of these will pick up that configuration. So FlowRunner logger is important because as you can see, there's a bunch of logging going on in here. So 2 things, so basically email and then code for the FlowRunner logger. And after that, click start flow. So now that the flow is running, the question is, how do we get to run this flow? Because the very first thing that happens here, it's going to be an external callback. Okay, go to the FlowRunner documentation, which is available at docs.flowrunner.ai. And then in there, what you will need to do is on the very first page where you of the documentation, in the welcome/learn section, locate the sample error handling section and go towards the bottom of it. And right here, this is a very scary URL that will run that flow. But don't worry, I'll show you how to get it configured So it is not as scary. And for this, use either Postman or I personally prefer to use a tool that is called Advanced REST Client. Okay. And it doesn't really matter. Use any tool that you are familiar with that can generate REST requests, that can send a post or GET request. So here, to configure this request, couple of things. Number one, navigate to your flow, select this data for new task, and make sure to copy this callback URL right here for data for new task. So I will copy it right here. And then if you go back to your Advanced REST Client or Postman, I already have this URL, but I can just paste it again. And then make sure to select the post request. It's just going to be more visual. You can use get, that is fine, because in the documentation, it talks about a get request. So this is going to be like all one giant line. But if you go with post, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to work with. So now, this is the body that needs to be there for the flow to work. And then the way this body works is I'm just going to put it side by side right here. So notice that in the GET request, there is a parameter called description, and it says created by FlowRunner trigger. There is a parameter called done, which is set to false. There is a parameter due, which has a timestamp. And then there is a parameter that is URL encoded here, but it really, these %20, it becomes a space. So in the post request, you can have a parameter that is responsible user email. Okay, so these are 4 parameters that exist and are expected by the flow. And we will see once we start going over the flow implementation of how these parameters are used. But the story of this is that, with all of these parameters, the flow will just save a record in the database and then send an email to this email address. Okay, and in fact, I don't want to have this space right here. So these are the parameters. I wonder if I can make this a little bit larger. Yes, I can. But perfect. This is good. So now everything is configured right here. I will also bring my FlowRunner logger into the window, and then I will just execute this request. Okay, so the request is executed. FlowLogger detected that that request came in, and at this point there are no errors. So this message is just error handling flow. It's not an actual error. So what we see here, it basically says it got data for new task, and then the task was saved in a database, an email was sent out, and then the task was updated in the database. Okay, so with these parameters like this, everything's good. There were no errors whatsoever. Okay, and also we can check if that email has arrived. And for this, let me get to my inbox, and I'm going to bring that email into here. So this is the email that was sent by my flow. Okay, and the flow is configured just to send the description. Like, see this description, that becomes the body of the email. So far so good. Now what we can do is we can clear all this output and modify something in here to make it invalid. So for example, rather than description, we can just put number 1, which changes the structure because it's an entire different property altogether, and then send this request again. Okay, so now we see that the flow says, okay, I received this data for the task, but then it says create task error. So an error happened. Okay, an error happened because it could not save data in the database. Okay, and to generate another error, let's fix this and then make this email address invalid. So because this is just an invalid email address. So let's clear the output again and then send a request. And then now we can see that it received data for the task. Task was created in the database, but then we received an email from we received an error from sending an email. It says the invalid to header. So the to address is invalid. And indeed, this is not a valid email address. Okay. So now that you have seen how the errors are being reported into FlowLogger, let's take a look at what actually happens in the flow itself. For this, I will stop the flow, and then let's start looking into the implementation. Okay, number one, the flow starts with an external callback. An external callback has this URL, and this is the URL that we used in this case. I used the Advanced REST Client by MuleSoft, or you can use it in Postman, or you can use it in a plain browser. It's completely up to you. So once it receives that request, the flow instance is created and the flow starts running. The very first thing that it does, it uses this log new task data, okay, where it says data for new task. Remember, in our flow, this is the output that we're getting, data for new task. It basically dumps this information into the log. And then the data that it sends into the log, it says data for new task data. Kind of redundant, but that's what it is. So here, the event that triggered this external callback is going to be known in the flow as this data for new task. And by the way, if you just want to change this, just remove this data, and that's going to be a little bit cleaner. And nothing breaks in the flow. It will just recognize that this is the data that it's going to be logging. After this is done, it goes into the block that is called save record in the database with the label create new task in database. And then it goes into the table called tasks and saves a new record. And then it saves the new record where the columns of that record, or also known as properties, are description, due, and responsible user email. Okay. And if any, and then what it does is basically says, okay, from this event, data for a new task, it's going to take property description for this column, property due, and property responsible user email, and then save this data in this. So remember, when I changed in the request, when I changed this description to description 1, what happened is the flow was looking for the property description in the event data. And that property did not exist because I changed it to description 1. And then that resulted in the error in this action. So when that error happened, notice that out from this block, from create new task in database, there are 2 outgoing errors. One is actually 3. 1, 2, and 3. If everything is good, then what's going to happen is this block will log a message saying that task was created in the database. And if you remember that we've seen this when everything was good, and then it will proceed executing. However, if this block results in an error, notice that it goes to this block that is handle error, the red one. And the handle error is available under utils handle error right here. So handle error is a special type of block that is there and will be activated only if the block or blocks connected to it result in an error. So in this case, FlowRunner says, okay, this guy resulted in an error. Does it have an error handler connected to it? It does, so that the flow execution just continues down this path. These paths will not happen. It will choose this alternative way of proceeding. And then this guy, all it really does, it's sort of like, it's not even a router. It's sort of like a special gate that the flow goes through, and then everything else continues to run here. So does it need to stop here? Not necessarily. You can just have an alternative flow execution. But in this case, our flow execution just logs this error. Okay, so it says create task error, and then it puts this create task error. So what is this red block? Well, this is the data that is received by error handler. Notice that in this create task error, it says referenced result data as create task error. So this, whatever this guy received from the block that is connected to it, is what's going to get logged. So now that you have seen it, let's rerun that scenario just to see what will be logged. And for this, I will simulate this error again. So I will change description to a non-existing property, and then I will execute it. Oh, the flow is not running, so let me start this flow. And let's run it again. So now the flow ran. So notice that it says create task error, and then we have this JSON object. And this JSON object right here, it has properties code, source, and message. Notice that the source is create new task in database. That is very important for the reason that this element contains three properties, and one of them is actually called source, which points to the block that resulted in an error. And this becomes a very flexible part of your flow design, because you could have a single handle error that multiple blocks are pointing to it. And because create task error has a property source, you can differentiate and know which block resulted in an error if you have more than one coming to error handler. In this flow, this is not the case, but it is an option for you to have a single error handler that processes errors from multiple blocks. So if everything's good, the flow continues. This block sends out an email to the email address that comes from the actual event that triggered the flow. So here we say responsible user email. Okay. If that email address is malformed, then this will result in error, and we've seen that happening. And then that email, that error will be also logged in FlowLogger. Finally, if this is good, then this will be executed, and then the task will be updated with a property that email notification was sent. And again, there will be an additional log message saying that the task was updated. So once again, error handling is super important. Definitely use it in your flows. Add as many error handlers as you want, or just you could have one, but definitely apply error handling in your flow branches, because you want any kind of error that happens at least to be logged, so you can see and what's going on, and then provide some additional error handling if needed. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, happy automating.